Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have with us Graham Robinson, lived experience advocate, author, and whose childhood trauma shaped his commitment to understanding and healing. So we'll learn about his own journey from silence to healing, offering practical tools and genuine empathy for men who have carried their pain alone. Welcome to the show, Graham.
Hi, AJ. Thank you. It's great. I'm pleased to be here.
You're welcome. Welcome to the show, Graham. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what you talk about and what we'll be talking about. We'll be talking about childhood trauma and healing. So we'll all learn all about this. But before that, let's talk and learn a bit about your journey, your background, your story, so that people know who they are listening to.
Sure. So, of course, as adults, we don't know that we, have been traumatized as kids, and we do things in our adult life. And when I started to have serious problems in my adult life, like I would watch the television and see a man put an arm around a son on TV, and I started to break down and cry. And I'm starting to wonder what's going on with me. And so I discovered that childhood trauma, of course, when your parents don't love you as a child, emotionally, they're not there for you, or they're physically absent as well. Kids feel abandoned and unloved, and that ends up building this deep shame inside kids. Now, my father was also physically abusive, but that really didn't have as much impact on me as the emotional. And as I grew into an adult, the emotions that were sort of hadn't actually been developed properly, because I didn't have a father figure who showed me how to build proper emotion, how to love, how to hug, how to even be open with other people. So my relationships were all me always waiting for the person to leave or driving them away, because I didn't want to be abandoned. So what I would do is I would end up driving them away myself and then blame them and say, well, it's not my fault. It's never my fault. But of course it was, because I didn't trust them. I was very difficult with them. And so what happens with you as an adult, through my years, ended up leaving home at the age of 13 and leaving school at 13, and went off into a big city, and all sorts of things happened. And for me, it was safer to be out of my house and away than it was to be in the house. In the house, I was always walking around in fear, like walking on eggshells, because my parents used to scream at each other day and night. And as a child, I'd had all of this for 13 years. I was terrified. And so even as a 5 and 6 year old, I would run away and hide and play in the fields. And everything I did, even we lived in Africa for a while, and I would rather be in the African bush on my own than be in my house. And although there weren't lions around at that stage near where I lived, there was still plenty of dangers like snakes and small animals that, but to me, I would felt safer. So what happens is that the inner child inside you is so scared about being in the home, and it can't survive there. It wants you to find a safe place. So we look for safety in different ways. But these traumas carry with us into adulthood. We can't get rid of them just by growing up. And so, you will do things like, a common one is people pleasing. So you want everybody to like you. So what you do is, if somebody comes to you, no matter how busy you are, like you might be busy, say you're doing your show and you've got something else to do and you've got to run some other errands, and then somebody else comes along and says, hey, I need you to do this for me. People pleasers, and I was one for a while, will say, yes, I'll do whatever you want, because they don't want people to be disappointed in them. And we become control freaks. We must control everything. But the biggest problem that certainly older men have is their rage. So anger sits below that shame, or sits where that shame is in your body, and that can turn into anger instantly. Like I could go from sort of like we're talking now, to a rage of 10 if somebody did something that triggered my emotions. And that often was even just noise. Noise used to trigger me. And I'd suddenly get all anxious and I'd want to scream at people to stop and be quiet. And they might only be talking in just a loud voice. They weren't doing anything really wrong. But my inner child got scared again. And when the inner child gets scared, we sort of rage like a tiger. We come out and really want to scare people away. So the difficulty for us is, as we grow older, to manage those times that these things come up. To give you an example of what can happen if you don't do it, I used to work in radio in Australia, and I was working in a town, and there was a small town only a short distance from us, and there was a 60-year-old man. He was about 60, 62, I believe, and he was a local community figure looking after his grandchildren one day, and his wife was there, and he murdered all three of them. He killed all three. Now, this man had shown nothing else previously, and his daughter was a serving police officer in the town. She came home, and he attacked her but didn't kill her. And then he left and went to a hotel, sat down at the bar and ordered a beer, and just sat there drinking it until the barman recognized him from the television screen, that his picture had been put up after the police were called, and arrested him. When he was asked why, he said, "I don't know." He said, "I have no idea why I did it." Now, I'm not saying it's all childhood trauma that did that, but that's what childhood trauma can do to you. The anger is so deep and it comes out so suddenly that something on that day triggered him that maybe had been happening for 5 years, 10 years, even for all of his life. Like his partner may have been saying something or nagging him or doing whatever, or the children may have said something, and all of a sudden this anger comes out because it comes from the years of you as a child, and it's very deep seated. And that's where I like to work with men, is to talk about the anger to begin with and the shame, and make them realize it's not their fault. Like, they're not at fault because they were abused. And the first thing with men is to get them to realize that they actually were abused. Because, men of our vintage, sometimes with our parents, we thought that, being smacked and being hit or whatever was part of growing up and part of whatever. And some people can deal with it, but if there's no there's no love with that. Like, if your parent, after smacking you, says, "Look, I had to do that because you did something wrong and I love you," then that a child can cope with that. But if all they get is being hit and they don't get any love, then they develop these symptoms, and this trauma continues to build. My father, the first time I remember, I was about five or six, and I'd stolen a couple of toy helicopters from a shop. We were at a beach. And yes, that wasn't a good thing to do, but in the car I played with them, and he pulled over near a forest, and he took off his belt, and he chased me through the forest, beating me with it. And instead of, a father taking me back to the shop, making me apologize to the shopkeeper, pay for them and not get the helicopters, which would have taught me a good lesson, instead he did what he did. I understand, I've learnt about his trauma as well as an adult, but the trouble is that if you're going to do any of these things, you need to show your children love. And that's all the kids want. They want to be held and hugged, and they want to be told, you've got to obviously discipline them in certain ways, but you don't have to discipline them by beating them. I would have learnt a very good lesson from taking those helicopters back and being embarrassed and paying for them and being ashamed, but I wouldn't have felt the pain. And so it's really important for adults to see how they treat their children. But if they've got childhood trauma, they find it difficult. They get angry with their kids, or they get angry with people around them. So my work really focuses on trying to reduce the amount of anger in people. And there are simple ways to do that. You can name your anger. So, for example, I call my anger George. And whenever even though I know the work I'm doing, I still feel angry at times. So I just place a hand on my chest and say, no, George, we're not going to get angry. And what you're doing, even though it might sound a little silly, what you're doing is you're breaking that cycle. So the cycle of getting angry for those with childhood trauma just keeps building like a storm, just keeps building on top of each other. And if you don't interrupt that storm, we all understand where that happens, where that goes. So that's really the work I like to do. And look, I know you talk to CEOs and people who've been led very successful lives. They too can have childhood trauma. It's when childhood trauma can drive you to be a perfectionist, to be perfect at everything and have everybody around you be perfect. And many CEOs are like that. Their driven behavior is obsessive work, and that comes from trauma as well. That is not just because they are good CEOs, it's because this trauma drives them and they think they have to show everybody that they're the best in the world. And that's what drives them on. But everybody needs to, you need to look at your background and see whether you have trauma in your childhood, because it's really important for your benefit to release it. It really, you can have healthy relationships, you'll be good with your kids, good with other people, once you start to understand that you can release this trauma.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Graham. One thing I want to understand is that you said that whenever you faced difficulties at home, you used to go outside and find some happiness outside. People are like that. They try to balance one thing. When they are not getting something, they go out and try to do it. And some people are able to do that. They find that balance outside in one way or the other. We all need that sense of love and belonging somewhere or the other, some lesser degree, higher degree. Why is it that the balance that we get anywhere else, why is that not enough to compensate for the difficult times that we face at home, and later
Mhm.
on that balances it, rather than how does that work?
So what happens is that what is happening at home, I'll use my example. So my parents, as I said, screamed at each other, and it was a very fearful situation. And my mother or my father never showed love to me or to my other siblings. So what happens is, my inner child, if you want to, becomes scared and fearful, and you create this sort of other personality. But by leaving the home, the inner child felt safe. I felt safe. So my body didn't shake or didn't do whatever. And I would play in the fields, and I would play from morning till evening. In winter in England, in summer, I'd play in Africa and I'd go off into the hills and do whatever. I felt completely safe. And I must admit, I had no regard for my safety. I didn't even think about it. I didn't think about something attacking me. I felt inside safe. But when I went back home, and the moment I would go through the front door, my inner child would start, and I would start to get anxious again. And I knew I had to walk on eggshells. Um, it was a matter of whatever I did, if I did something that was just wrong, a little thing, I knew I'd be screamed at, and it was terrifying for me. I'll give you a quick example. My mother was quite religious, and every Sunday she would go to church, not with my father, on her own. And one Sunday, when she came back, she would cook lunch. And she was cooking lunch, and my father wasn't there. It was just myself, my brother, and my very young daughter, young sister. She'd just been born. And I'm sitting opposite ends to my mother, and she cooked. I don't know if you've ever tasted the vegetable Brussels sprouts, which are really awful. And the way my mother cooked was even worse. She wasn't a great cook, but Anyway, so she cooked these Brussels sprouts with this other food for lunch, and they were so hard I couldn't cut them. So when I pressed my knife on it, it bounced off the plate and onto the floor. So she screamed at me not to play with my food. And then she was holding a knife in her hand. She threw the knife at me, and it sliced across the top of my head. And so I started bleeding. And then she screamed, put me in my sister's pram, rushed me off to hospital. But that's the sort of fear that I always had Now, that was an extreme incident that only happened once. Generally, my mother wasn't violent towards us, but but that's how on edge we always were. Always was. So what you're talking about, unfortunately, it's called complex post-trauma disorder. It's like PTSD, except it's complex because you live in it all the time. Whereas, PTSD is from an event. It can be a long event like a war, or there's something emergency that's happened. You suffer PTSD. CPTSD is about you living in that trauma all the time and can't escape. So I was traumatized before I walked in the door, and of course I would, and being, I guess in many ways, you try to get the attention of your parents because you're hoping that they will show attention and love you. So you do naughty things. So I remember my father used to build these big models, and I would try and play with them when he's not home. And I broke one day, and my brother saw it, and we're desperately trying to stick it back together so he doesn't notice, because we're terrified of what will happen once he does. That's the sort of feeling you live with. So going outside helped, but it doesn't relieve the stress and trauma. When the moment you go back inside, that trauma kicks back in and it's sitting around you. Now, not every moment is traumatic. Not every moment do your parents or my parents were difficult with me, but the trauma sits underneath everything. You're basically always just on edge waiting. And that's why we become so hyper vigilant as adults. We're always scanning for danger. Like I will, even when I'm in a restaurant now, as in my final years of life, I still will sit in a restaurant and scan around for danger. And people comment to me and they say, "You eat your food so quickly. You don't take time and enjoy it." But I eat my food quickly because I want to finish it and be ready to go. And that's the depth of the trauma. I mean, I know it's silly, and I understand as an adult I shouldn't be doing this, but when it comes to it, that's how I feel comfortable. That's how I feel safe. And these are the things that are left with us. We have to balance them and understand them. But you can get help. I'm a living example of getting help because I was an awful person 6, 7 years ago. But you do need to get professional help. You need to see somebody and talk to somebody, and you need to let your partner know these are the things that have gone on with you, because they need to understand some of the moments you have.
Absolutely, Graham. So the world of children is different. The world of adults is different. Unfortunately, the age gap is so that it's difficult to know for a child to know the world of adults at that point in time, maybe later on. So that story is a different story in every household all across the world. Some are very good, some is not so. Some people are not so fortunate. But not every story turns out to be that way. A person who grows up in a difficult household with that sort of a background, when they grow up, how would they know whether the issues that they are facing is because of that thing, or is it also in the natural course of life? It's the individual personality also. You can grow up to be like that. How do you evaluate yourself at that point and know what actually is the cause? Is it that, or is it your own personality the way you are?
So that's a great question, because you're right. I mean, what happened to me, you could put another child live my life, and they may not be affected the way I was. So there is a thing called the Childhood Experiences Questionnaire, or ACEs. So it's Adverse Childhood Experiences Questionnaire. And what you can do is you look at the 10 questions, and the more you answer yes to, the more traumatized you are. Now, you can answer yes to just one and still have lots of trauma. But you're right. You can answer yes to one or two and say, well, I don't have any trauma. That didn't traumatize me, because people are different. Kids themselves see everything in black and white. When we're young, we see good, bad. We don't see the gray areas in between. As we become adults, we of course can find adult life can shape us as well. Like, we could have several bad relationships and stop trusting men or women, depending on whom we're involved with. But if you need to really understand whether it comes from childhood or not, the ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, is a good way to begin. Secondly, you just have to think about your childhood. Everybody, like, if we were smacked, I can live with that. That doesn't actually worry me. The emotional loss is what really worried me. So if you've got a father and mother who gave you lots of love, but occasionally smacked you and occasionally put you in your room or took things away from you because you were naughty, that may not have any impact on you other than realizing and teaching you a lesson, as long as they gave you love along with that. If they took the love away as well, then you will be traumatized much deeper. But some children, even a child, like for example, a young girl, if her mother or father comes out, she's wearing a new, say, a new dress to go out for an evening, and they say, "Oh, you shouldn't wear that. That makes you look whatever." That can have a major effect on a child. That one comment, they don't need to say anything else, but some children carry with them forever, and then they have eating disorders, they think of themselves with low self-worth, and so on. It is very complex, and to break it down, but you're right, you could have all of these things happen to you and still not do the things I do in adulthood. You could have what you would consider a perfectly normal, healthy relationship. You could have great children and you love them. Like, I have 3 children, I love them dearly, and I've never done anything other than love them and hug them. And so if you do those things, you could go on, absolutely, and you look back at your childhood and say, mine wasn't good, but I'm not being bored into being affected by that trauma. But what I would say is that there is always a little bit of trauma in there, in ways that you might do things, and you just have to look at it. Like, you have to look at yourself. Are you controlling around friends? Do you feel alone? One of the things I was left with, even when I'm with my friends or at a party, I've always felt alone. And in fact, I left my ex-wife because I said to her, I don't feel I belong here in the marriage. And she said, well, you're being stupid. What do you mean? And I said, I don't know. I tried for 2 years. Like, we were married 18 years, but towards the end, I said, I don't know. I just feel like I don't belong. So it's one of those sorts of feelings you can't get rid of. And even though we may not feel that at 20, these things start to show up more and more between 40 and 50 and 60. They start to come out of us. So yes, you can have a bad childhood and still be a very, very good adult and loving and sweet and have great relationships. It really depends on your personality as to how much you absorb. Some people absorb more in the trauma than others. And it depends on also, you may find love elsewhere. So you might step out of your childhood home, meet a love of your life, say at school, and you're surrounded by love, and that's enough to help you heal. So I know everybody sort of says it, and it's a simple thing, but love is the answer to all of it, really. I mean, there is other things you have to do, but if you're loved, that will go a long way to helping you heal your trauma, because you feel safe, you feel protected in that love.
Absolutely. So, what are some of the things that people can do? As I said, it comes later in life. By that time, you have lived a bit of life, either 40s or 60s. What are the things that one can do to overcome these things from the past? You Some people talk of going back into the past. And some people, is that the only option, or there are other options?
So if one of the things that most therapists will tell you is you've got to feel the feelings. So you've got to go back and feel, but you don't have to necessarily dive right in deeply into the feelings, because they hurt and they upset. So you can do some simple things to begin with. Firstly, if you get anxious, something's happening and you start to get anxious, I would say to people, put your hand on your stomach and just take some slow, deep breaths. Just breathe in slowly and deeply. What you'll do is all of this trauma sits in our nervous system. That's I'm not a psychologist as such, but so that's a very basic description, but that's the truth. That's where it sits. And so you're regulating your nervous system by taking these deep breaths. The hand on your stomach is telling your inner child that everything's safe and you can relax, because it's the one that's getting scared. So that will help you some very basic ways. There are many therapies. Meditation always helps. Doing, I know it sounds silly, but doing things for yourself. So abused children and now abused adults tend not to look after themselves as well as they should. So they don't tend to think of themselves as loving themselves. So you need to start thinking of yourself as a good person, loving yourself, as doing right. You need to learn to say no when you're overwhelmed, as I said earlier, by people coming and asking you too much. You need to be able to open up to your partner and talk honestly. All of these things will help open up where you are. But in the end, I would highly recommend people seek out a professional that works with childhood trauma. And there are many different therapies, EFT, tapping, there's meditation, as I said, there's breath work. There is, of course, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very good as well. And even there is talk therapy. I am trained in hypnotherapy. That works as well to go to the trauma. But in the end, the one point you do have to do is go in back to yourself and understand the feelings. Doesn't mean you have to relive every moment, but you have to go back to where it began and understand what happened and feel it. Now, that is not always easy, and sometimes you can't feel. So, um, in my books, I've written this story. So I've told this, and my children have read this part. When I left home at 13 in the small town I was working, I went to meet some friends at a hotel. And in those days, I was in a small town called Darwin in Australia. You could sit in the beer garden as a kid, as long as you didn't go near the bar. I could stay there. They wouldn't harass me. Anyway, there was this couple there, an older man and a younger girl. Now at 13, of course, boys' hormones are raging away, and this girl was flirting with me a bit. She was older than me, but my hormones are out of control here. I'm thinking she likes me and whatever. Anyway, she invites me upstairs to a room. She's staying at the hotel. And so we go upstairs, and she gets undressed. I don't know what to do. So I'm sort of lying in bed with her, completely just like, what do I do here? Anyway, she gets frustrated, gets up and leaves. And then the man comes in, and he had a knife and he raped me. So what happened was that, what I'm saying is that that moment I find still very difficult to find it within myself. Now, if my parents had done that, I'm sure the emotions would all be there. But because this was a stranger and it was a horrific moment, but I can't find it. In all the therapy I've done and all the work I do on myself, I cannot find any feelings connected to that. So, this is why you need professional help, for them to guide you through and find where you are. Because sometimes those feelings are easily found, other times the feelings are not. And going back has to be treated cautiously. You don't just jump back into the last moment that you were hurt. You have to sort of work your way there and understand what you're doing, and understand afterwards that you can deal with it, because a lot of stuff will come up. It's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately.
Absolutely, absolutely, Graham. There's so much to learn about all this, and I'm sure a lot of people would want to connect with you, learn from your books. What's the best way for them to do so?
Through my website, actually, the books and the work I do there. And even if they just want to chat, I talk to a lot of men, just talk about it, and tell them my experience, and they can tell me theirs. The website is grahamrobinsonwellness.com. And they're more than happy to send me an email from there and say, I'd love to chat. And it doesn't matter where they are in the world, I'll always be available to just talk. No, there's nothing, they don't have to take any of my services or do anything. I'm happy to talk, because the more men can, in particular, but talk to women as well, the more men can realize that they need to do something, the better for all of us. And often when I talk, it's the women who come up to me and say, oh, what you said sounds exactly like my husband or my partner, that he does all these things that you mentioned. And they want the partner to come and talk to me. And so on, men don't tend to approach you as much as they should, which is a shame.
Absolutely. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
AJ, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Cheers.